3 bodies of Apache women hung upside down, their limbs tightly bound with rough rope. Blood had dried into dark streaks against their sun-kissed bronze skin. Their backs were marked with whiplashes so deep that the flesh had split open. One of them was completely unconscious, her head hanging low as if she were dead. The other 2 were still breathing, barely, their eyes open but void of light. Elias had seen scenes like this before. This was not an execution. This was abandonment left to die slowly. The Apache tribe had passed judgment, delivered the beatings, and walked away, leaving the western sun to finish the rest. He looked around. Footprints of warriors were still clearly visible in the hardened dirt. They had left not long ago. If he cut the ropes and tried to help, they would come back. And when they did, none of the 4 would survive. Elias Ward was a lonely farmer. His wife had died during the epidemic. His only son was buried just behind the old wooden house. He had grown used to watching everything he loved get taken away, powerless to stop it. But this time, there were 3 women still breathing. Elias stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he drew the knife from his belt. The blade sliced through the first rope. The heavy body dropped, and he caught her just in time. She did not cry out, she just wheezed faintly. Second rope. Then, the third. When Elias hoisted the tallest woman onto his shoulders, sweat mixed with blood as it ran down his back. He did not look back at the wooden posts, because he knew very well. From this moment on, he had chosen to stand with the condemned and go up against the entire Apache tribe. Elias managed to bring all 3 women back to the cabin just as the sun dipped low on the horizon. The old wooden house creaked in the hot wind, filled with the scent of antiseptic mixed with blood and dust. He laid each of them down with care, as if handling something so fragile it might shatter at the slightest touch. The tallest one, Takina, was heavier than he had expected. Her body was solid, broad-shouldered, muscles still tense even in unconsciousness. As Elias bent down to change her bandages, Takina woke up. There was no scream. No pointless panic, only the raw instinct of a warrior who had been betrayed. She grabbed the knife from the table, rolled over, and lunged straight at him. The blade cut through the air, grazing Elias's neck. He managed to step back just in time. A burning pain shot through his forearm. Blood dripped onto the wooden floor. The other 2 women jolted awake on reflex, pressing their backs against the wall, eyes wide open, ready to fight if they had to. Not a single word was spoken. Elias stood still. He did not reach for his gun. He simply placed another knife slowly on the table and stepped back, widening the space between them. His voice was low, not commanding. If you want to leave, then leave. If you want to stay, then stay. The cabin door was still open. The hot wind blew in, carrying the scent of dry earth and the faint hum of insects. Takina stared at Elias, her chest rising and falling. She was used to seeing men afraid, or angry, or trying to assert control. But this one did not. He turned his back, wrapped a cloth around the wound on his arm, and went on boiling water as if nothing had happened. That night, no one slept all the way through. The 3 women took turns keeping watch. Takina sat closest to the door, the knife resting on her thigh, her broad back cutting off half the glow from the oil lamp. The other 2 leaned against the wall, their eyes fixed on Elias. If he made one wrong move, they would not hesitate. But Elias did not make a move. He lay on the wooden chair near the stove, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to the heavy breathing behind him. For the first time in many years, the cabin was no longer empty. And for the first time, the silence held a deadly tension not from nature, but from people who had been betrayed far too many times. Morning came slow and heavy. Sunlight slipped through the cracks in the cabin door, landing on the wooden floor where dried blood from the night before still lingered. Elias was up early, as was the habit of a farmer who had long lived alone. He lit the stove, boiled water, and set a pot of thin porridge over the fire. He did not look back. Takina watched from the corner of the room. She stood a full head taller than Elias, with broad shoulders and arms as solid as oak. But this morning, her gaze had softened. It was no longer fierce, only cautious. The kind of caution born in those who had learned to survive through suspicion. Elias placed a bowl of porridge on the table, then stepped back. "Eat," he said evenly. "Water is outside. If you need to leave, The horses are behind the barn. There were no conditions, no price to pay. The other two women looked to Takina. She gave a faint nod. They ate slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if they rushed. Elias stepped outside to repair a broken section of the fence. Dust from the wind clung to his shirt. From inside the cabin, Takina watched him. The man worked as if no one had been hanging hafted, dead just the day before. The day passed in silence. Elias cleaned and rewrapped their wounds, his movements efficient, careful not to touch more skin than necessary. He did not ask why they were beaten. He did not ask why they had been tied up. That kind of respect, strange and dangerous, unnerved Takina more than any violence ever had. By late afternoon, Takina stepped out into the yard. She tested a rotted piece of wood, lifting it with ease. Elias saw her but said nothing. He handed her a hammer, then turned away. Takina nailed a fallen plank back into place. The sound of the hammer echoed steady and strong. For the first time since being strung up, her body was working not to endure but to rebuild. When the sunset painted the horizon red, Takina walked back into the cabin. She stood in front of Elias and spoke slowly, her English thick with accent. "You are not afraid?" Elias paused. One beat. Then answered, "I am, but there are things scarier than dying." Takina understood. She had lived long enough to know exactly what he meant. Night fell. The cabin door remained open. The knife was still within her reach. But this time, Takina did not sit by the door. She sat at the table, across from Elias, with a small oil lamp between them, faint, but enough to hold back the darkness. The rain came in the middle of the night, rare and violent, as if the western sky had finally had enough of all the blood spilled on this land. Rain hammered down on the cabin roof, poured through gaps in the rotting wood, and hit the floor in cold, stinging streaks. Takina began to burn with fever. At first, it was just short, quick breaths. Then came the uncontrollable shivering. Elias caught the familiar scent of infection, the same one that had haunted him through the plague years. He eased Takina down, changed her bandages, and cleaned the whip marks that had turned swollen and red across her back. Her bronze skin burned under his hand. Takina drifted in and out of consciousness. Her lips moved, broken Apache words spilling out between fevered gasps. Elias did not understand the language, but he understood fear. She kept repeating something, voice cracking each time, then broke into sobs, like a child forgotten in the dark. Elias sat at her bedside, gripping a wet cloth in his hand. Old memories rose without warning. The small room where his son had once gasped for breath, skin pale and gray, eyes open but no longer seeing him. The doctor shaking his head, his wife on her knees by the bed, hands trembling, begging for something no one could give. That night, Elias had sat exactly like this, waiting for a miracle that never came. "I am sorry," Elias whispered, not knowing who he was speaking to. Suddenly, Takina grabbed his hand. Her grip was weak but firm. In her fevered haze, she shook her head, tears running down the sides of her face. Elias leaned in closer, catching the broken words, half English, half Apache. "Cannot have children." Kept beating. "Please do not leave me." Those words cut deeper than any blade ever had. Outside, the pouring rain washed the dust from around the cabin, rinsing old blood from the wooden steps. But inside, two people's pasts came crashing down all at once. A man who had failed to save his family, and a woman punished for not being able to create life. By dawn, Takina's fever had begun to break. Her breathing slowed, steadied. Elias was still sitting there, his back hunched with exhaustion, eyes bloodshot. When Takina woke, the sky was pale with morning light. She saw Elias still there. He had not left. After a long moment, she spoke softly, her voice raspy but clear. "You have lost someone, haven't you?" Elias did not answer right away. Then, he nodded. Takina turned her face toward the window, watching the rain still clinging to the glass. "I understand," she said. Just 3 words. But for the first time, the silence between them did not hide anything. It was the silence of understanding. "Thank you so much for being here. If you connected with this story, leave a comment with the number 1. The days after the rain passed quietly, as if the dry land around the farm had decided to offer them a brief chance. Takina grew stronger. The other two women were standing more firmly now on the feet that had once hung helpless. Each morning, Elias opened the cabin door and saw something he had not believed in for years. The farm was coming back to life. Takina worked from the moment the sun peeked over the horizon. She hauled wood, rebuilt the fences, dug deeper into the old dry well. Each swing of her hammer rang out with purpose, not to destroy, but to rebuild. Elias stood nearby, handing her tools when needed, without giving orders, without claiming credit. They worked side by side, in silence, but it was the silence of those who knew loss too well to waste words. One afternoon, Takina suddenly stopped. She looked up toward the northern ridge. The wind had shifted, carrying the faint smell of old ash. She knelt to the ground and touched a faint footprint revealed by the rain. A scout's mark. She had seen them many times in her life, always a sign that judgment was close behind. "The tribe will come," Takina said, her voice calm, almost cold. Elias nodded. He had known that, from the moment he cut the first rope, but hearing it spoken out loud made it heavier. He checked his guns, counted the bullets, patched the cabin windows. No one talked about running. No one suggested handing anyone over. Night fell fast. The air was unnaturally still. The insects had gone silent. The wind held its breath. Takina stepped into the cabin and closed the door for the first time since she had arrived. She stood in front of Elias, tall and steady, her eyes no longer wild but resolute. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke, each word slow and deliberate, like a choice she had weighed carefully. "Tonight, you will sleep with me." Elias froze, but in her voice, he heard what she truly meant. It was not an invitation. It was not possession. It was a choice to stand together, a declaration that if death came with the morning, she would not face it alone, and she would not let him face it alone either. Elias took a deep breath. "Not out of fear," he said softly. Takina shook her head. "Because there is no way back." They sat side by the light of the oil lamp. With no urgency, and no vows. Outside, the darkness folded itself around the farm, and somewhere out there in the night, those who had passed the sentence were already on their way back. Before the sun could rise, the ground had already begun to tremble under the rhythm of hooves. Takina heard it first. She stood up and pulled the curtain aside. On the horizon, figures emerged steady, fierce. The Apache tribe had returned. The warriors spread out around the farm, forming a closed circle. The war paint on their faces had dried. This was not a search party. This was an execution squad. Elias stepped onto the porch, gun in hand. He stood tall, his back pressed to the cabin door. Behind him were three women who had escaped death, and the only reason he was standing there at all. In front of him, an elder stepped forward, driving a staff carved with tribal symbols firmly into the ground. "She has been sentenced," the elder said, voice deep and resolute, pointing at Takina. "She was beaten, she was hanged, she was left to die. But the sentence is not finished." Takina stepped out from the shadow of the doorway. She did not hide behind Elias. She stood beside him tall, steady, unbowed. "You already had your part," she said. "I am still alive." A murmur rippled through the line of warriors. The elder shook his head. "Being alive does not mean being forgiven. You broke our law." Elias tightened his grip on the gun. "If you want to take them," he said slowly, "you will have to kill me first." No one drew a weapon, but several hands moved to their knives. The elder stared at Elias for a long time, as if weighing something unfamiliar. "You do not belong in this, farmer," Elias answered without hesitation. "I do now." Takina turned to him for just a beat. Then she stepped forward half a pace, her voice carrying clearly across the open dirt. She spoke of the beatings, of the three women strung up like animals, of being abandoned to die. She did not beg. She declared, "I choose to be here," Takina said. "I choose freedom. I am not going back." Silence fell, heavy as stone. The elder turned to the warriors. Their eyes were divided, torn between the old laws and the reality standing before them. Finally, the staff struck the ground once more. "She is exiled," the elder said, "no longer Apache. We will not hunt her again." Takina closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Elias let out a slow breath, like a man who had just survived a blow meant to kill. As the tribe turned and rode away, Dust rose thick around them once more, but this time, no sentence hung over their heads. When the last of the tribe disappeared behind the ridge, a heavy silence settled over the farm so thick you could hear the wind brushing against the newly built fence. Elias still stood in the same spot, gun in hand, as if letting go would cause everything that just happened to collapse. Takina was the first to turn away. She walked slowly toward the well, drew water, and washed her face. The cold stream flowed over skin once marked by whips, carrying away dust and sweat. She did not cry, but something inside her shifted for the first time in years. No one was hunting her anymore. The other two women sat down in the dirt, their backs resting against the wooden barn. They laughed softly. The sound brittle, like it did not quite belong to them. It was not joy. It was the simple relief of breathing freely again. Elias put away the gun. He looked around the farm. The wooden posts that once held bodies now stood as nothing more than lifeless logs. The wind moved through, and there were no more moans. He realized his hands were shaking not from fear, but from the release of tension he had held too long. The evening came slowly. The sun hung low and dark red over the horizon, casting a gentler light than the days before. Takina stood by the fence, looking out toward the distance where her tribe used to be. After a long while, she spoke, her voice calm but hollow. "From today on, I no longer have a name there." Elias did not answer right away. He stepped beside her, not touching, just close enough for her to know she was not alone. "Here," he said softly. "A name only matters if the one who carries it wants it to." Takina nodded. She looked down at her hands, hands that had fought, had taken beatings, and now helped rebuild fences. "I do not know who I am supposed to become," she said. Elias looked toward the old cabin, where a soft oil lamp was already glowing. "We have time," he replied. Night came easier than the nights before. There was no sense of being watched, no fear of running at sunrise. The three women sat around the wooden table, sharing a simple dinner but one that felt whole. Across the lamp's soft light, Takina looked at Elias, her eyes no longer wary, no longer wild, only present. Out there, the desert was still unforgiving. But for the first time, Takina knew one thing for certain. The sentence was over, and her new life had just begun. The first rain of the season returned after many scorching days. It was not as fierce as the night Takina burned with fever, just gentle enough to soothe the cracked earth around the farm. The rain washed away the red dust that clung to the old wooden posts, the same ones once used to hang people, now cut down by Elias and stacked neatly to the side, as if closing a chapter no one wanted to remember. Takina stood under the porch, letting the rain soak through her hair and shoulders. Water ran along the scars on her back, not painful anymore, just cool and light. Elias stood beside her, saying nothing. Some moments lose their meaning when words are added. The farm changed a little every day. The fences stood straighter, the well dug deeper. The livestock pen was no longer empty. The other two women had found a rhythm, a life without orders. They worked, they rested, they slept without needing a knife under the pillow. One afternoon, as the sun tilted behind the ridge, Elias stood watching the field they had recently turned over. He finally spoke, voice low and steady as if letting out something long held inside. "This farm dotted is no longer a place made for just one person." Takina turned to him. She was not surprised. She had heard that sentence in her own mind ever since the tribe left. But hearing it from Elias gave it a new weight. It was not an invitation. It was a recognition. "I still do not know who I am supposed to become," she said. Elias nodded. "Neither do I." They stood there, on a land that had known only loss. There was no wedding, no loud promises, only two people who had once lost everything, choosing to stay not out of fear, but because they had found something worth protecting. Night fell. The lamp inside the cabin glowed, warmer than it had on nights before. Takina stepped through the door. No longer a rescued soul, but someone who had chosen this place as home. Elias closed the door not to trap her, but to keep the warmth in. Out there, the desert was still harsh. The wind still blew. The drought would come again. But on this land where people had once been strung up and left to die, a home had been built, not with blood, not with whips, but with trust, with courage, and with a quiet love strong enough to last. Dear friends, in the harshness of the Wild West. Elias Ward was not the strongest man. He was not a man of power or law. He was just a lonely farmer who had lost his wife, buried his son, and knew all too well the helplessness of watching a life slip through your hands. And that is exactly why he did not walk away. When 3 women were left hanging, waiting to die, Elias chose to cut the ropes, not to be a hero, but simply to remain human. Kindness does not always save the world, but sometimes it saves a life, and that changes everything. As long as we still dare to choose kindness, even in danger, hope never truly dies. Above all, I hope you are safe, happy, and surrounded by love, and may you never hesitate to share that love with those around you. I love you, all my cherished viewers of Wild West storytelling. Tell me, what did this story mean to you? Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed the story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the Wild West.